appointment? Have you got an appointment?
I've had an appointment, and I made an adjustment, and it worked well for 8 days. Last night it did not work. So next week I get to go have somebody look at my retina. I know a couple people who had some retina surgery that had to be flat on their face for 5 days. I am so hopeful that that's going to be the case. So
No, not guaranteed.
it's going to be awesome.
I don't imagine having retina surgery and throwing up's a good combination.
I don't think so.
I think the pressure would maybe negatively affect that.
Stacy is she's like, we need to get you a tracker. I do not want to track this. Well, do you think it's this? I don't know. Well, do you think it's this? I don't know. I don't know. Well, maybe it's the amount of sugar. I said, well, maybe it's not the amount of sugar. Maybe I'm allergic to apples and wheat now. That could be it. Anyway, I don't want to talk about that anymore. All right. So, here we are. It is Thursday morning Bible study. We're cruising right along, and I'll tell you all again, I'm getting a little confused between my sermon series on Sunday morning and where we are in this Life of Christ study. I get all excited about the wrong one at the wrong time. Like, oh, I should say that. Wait, no. That's actually for Palm Sunday. That's 3 weeks away. So anyway, we are looking this morning at passages in Matthew 12, Mark 2, and Luke 6. Matthew 12, Mark 2, and Luke 6. And I'll say again, it is amazing to me. I suppose, I've read through the Gospels numbers of times and studied them all in college from different perspectives, and I've read them on my own for study and for personal devotion. And every time I go through, I see something. I've been a little, it's crazy to me how Mark has so much stuff jammed into the first 2 chapters. It's taken Matthew 12 chapters to do it. Mark's putting it all in 2. Luke has got a little bit more space. And then John is off doing his own thing all together. John's gospel is 21 chapters. Yeah. 21 chapters in the Gospel of John. From chapter 12 on, it's all about the last week of Jesus' life. So more than half of his gospel is about 1 week of Jesus' life. And it's just been sort of interesting to me to see how all that comes together. So, whew.
I agree.
Well, I'm going to read from what I believe is probably Mark chapter 2, starting in verse 23. It might say in your Bible that Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. Does yours say that? No. Sorry.
At the very beginning?
Yeah, I like a heading.
Oh, no,
I don't know how much heading you have.
Mine just says over the Sabbath.
All right. Mark 2:23. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat, and he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, 'The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath.'" Now, I'll tell you that as I read through that right now, there's a couple things that I didn't write down in my notes. I'm going like, I wonder why that's the case. So, first of all, if Jesus and his disciples are walking along, they're doing something that I used to do as a kid. If you've not ever done it, you've missed out on one of the great joys of life. You go out into the wheat field and you knock off some heads and you put them in your hand and you roll them around until the grain gets separated out from the chaff and the head. Then you blow the chaff away and you have a handful of this beautiful golden wheat. It tastes so good. There's no comparison between that and whatever shows up in wheat bread. It's just so great. I can understand why they would want to do that because it does taste really good.
There's your problem.
Yeah, it's gluten. And gluten is the issue. So here's the thing that my brain went, hey, wait a minute. What's that in there for? Jesus and his disciples are going through grain fields. They're picking some. And the Pharisees say, why are they doing that? It's against the law. Why are there Pharisees walking along in this group?
Yeah, they had to be out there too.
Yeah. I hadn't really paid attention to that when I was studying this in the last couple of weeks. But I think I don't know if you read the newsletter article this last week about Jesus and the Pharisees.
Yeah.
But I think it does kind of point out that Jesus is not nearly as antagonistic toward them as they are toward him. That if somebody wants to follow along and listen, he's going to let them. No matter how opposed to him they may be. I wish I'd noticed that before. I'll have to go back and I'll make myself a note because, what are those darn Pharisees doing there?
They spent a lot of time trying to catch him out, and that might have been one reason why they were out there, following him around. Not to listen to him, but to always try to stumble him.
True. Does anybody know, any of my online thousands of viewers this morning, anybody have an idea about why the Pharisees are there with Jesus? He's just walking along, going from one place to another. You got a clue? Can you hear me? Is this thing on? Hey, tap, 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 tap.
Well, I'd be interested, if I was a Pharisee in those days, I think I'd be interested in what this man was saying. And I'd follow him to listen. I don't know. That's just me.
Well, I'm going to write myself another little note here about Nick and Joe. Because we do know that there were Pharisees who were amazed by what Jesus was doing and what he was teaching. Nicodemus came in the middle of the night to talk to him, and he talks in the plural. We know. So maybe these are some of those kind of convinced Pharisees, but they can't leave all of their I-dotting, T-crossing, box-checking behind. Like, hey, they can't eat that. That's against the rules. Anyway,
Old
that's...
habits die hard.
Yeah, old habits do die hard, that's for sure. So the Pharisees are questioning what Jesus and the disciples are doing, and they would see that what's happening is clearly against the law of Moses. Because what are they doing? They're harvesting and gleaning. They're cutting the heads, they're rolling around, separating the chaff from the wheat, and so they're harvesting and gleaning, and there shouldn't be any of that kind of work done on the Sabbath day. When I was growing up, my granddad always said that we don't plant corn on Sunday. If you plant corn on Sunday, it don't grow. It's against the rules. Just rest. So why are they doing what's illegal? And Jesus has a very quick answer for that. You probably remember this from our study of the life of David back in 1 Samuel 21. David went to Nob to Ahimelech the priest. Mark calls him Abiathar. Ahimelech trembled when he met him and asked, "Why are you alone? Why is no one with you?" David answered Ahimelech the priest, "The king sent me on a mission and said to me, 'No one is to know anything about the mission I'm sending you on. And as for my men, I have told them to meet me at a certain place. Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever you can find.' But the priest answered, 'I don't have any ordinary bread on hand. However, there is some consecrated bread, the bread of the presence, the face bread, the show bread, which was only for the priest. There were 12 loaves baked fresh at the beginning of every week, put on the golden table, and then the old bread was removed and eaten. I don't have any ordinary bread, but here's consecrated bread, provided the men have kept themselves from women." David replied, "Yeah, indeed, women have been kept from us as usual whenever I set out. The men's bodies are holy even on missions that are not holy. How much more so today?" So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, since there was no bread there except the bread of the presence that had been removed from before the Lord and replaced by hot bread on the day it was taken away. Okay, so that's the story that Jesus is referring to. David, hungry, trying to feed his men, comes to the tabernacle, asks the priest, "We're starving, what have you got to eat?" "Well, all I have is this bread of the presence, which is for the priests." "Well, could we have that?" "Well, I could give it to you, but you have to promise me that you're pure. You haven't been hanging out with loose women." "Oh, okay. Well, that's the case, because we don't have time for women. We're running for our lives. So feed me, Seymour." So he gets the bread. So Jesus makes the point. If it was permissible for David to eat this bread, and that would be kind of like arguing against Abraham Lincoln or George Washington. If it's permissible for David, the favorite king of Israel ever, to eat it, then would it not be lawful for Jesus and his companions to pluck a few heads of wheat or barley to feed themselves? Well, it seems reasonable. Carol seems to be having a little trouble with her connection. So Jesus gives them this story. David ate bread that was for the priests only, and that was lawful for him to do. So why would it not be lawful for my men to pluck a few heads of grain and feed themselves on the Sabbath? There's a story, but then he gives them a greater principle, which is that God gave the Sabbath to people for their benefit. When was the Sabbath instituted? Not everybody at once.
I don't remember.
Who took the first Sabbath?
Genesis, 7th day.
In Genesis, on the 7th day.
Yeah, that one.
God created days 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and on the 7th, God rested. He invented the weekend.
Yes. I know. It's like we're not there.
And that was a trick question. And so he says that that's the way that we're supposed to be too. That we should work for 6 days in a row, and on the 7th day we should rest. It's good for us. It's a benefit to us to do that. We have to do it to stay healthy, to stay holy, to stay focused. Jesus says the Sabbath wasn't given to you to beat you up and hold you down. The Sabbath wasn't intended to be a day of do or don't. which is what it has come to during Jesus' time. You can only walk this far. If you walk this much farther, you're breaking the rule. You can get the bowl out of the refrigerator, but you can't put anything into the bowl. You can't. I mean, it's all sorts of rules, legislation down to the tiniest little details. You can do this many stitches, but not that many stitches. If your animal falls into the well, you better hope that it's not too deep and they can get out on their own. And there's all kinds of things.
Did they not eat on Sunday?
They did eat, but they couldn't cook anything. They had to.
Everything had to be prepped.
It was a cold food day. You were having sandwiches and fruit and veggies, I guess, bread. They're supposed to be able on the Sabbath to rest and be refreshed. They're supposed to be able to take time to appreciate what they have received from God, to count their blessings from Him. They're supposed to spend time in prayer and worship. Again, the Sabbath was never intended by God to be all about checking boxes and making sure you don't cross the lines. And certainly, when we go back to the comments that Jesus made about the fasting and the cloth and the wineskins, Jesus, who is the Messiah of God in this new day, has authority over the Sabbath. He is the Lord of the Sabbath. And so, if you're the Lord of something,
You get to make the rules.
you make the rules, you call the shots. You say what's okay and what's not okay. So Jesus is freeing up this misunderstanding and abuse of Sabbath regulations and is giving it back to the people as God intended. Don't worry about feed yourself, for crying out loud. Just feed yourself. Any deep thoughts or questions about this particular section?
What were the Pharisees doing out walking on a Sunday or on the Sabbath? Would that have even, I guess, unless they were not going too far?
That's a good question. Why are they walking? Because there's not supposed to be a lot of walking around.
They must have had a very
Only so
good
many
reason.
steps.
So it's okay for them, but not.
Well, these are, they weren't
Yeah,
going
that's-
to have a good reason, one of the
Yeah.
two.
One thing that jumps out at me was how very foreboding eating the bread was, far more than the grain. Yet that was okay. So the grain, it's almost like nothing.
Yeah. And it would seem like there would be a lot of difference between holy, sacred, consecrated bread designated for only one purpose, but that's okay. But just walk along the side of the road and you pick some grain or you pull some fruit off of a tree and you're breaking the rule.
Yeah.
So there's another piece that goes along with this that I have absolutely nothing in my notes. I don't know how I did that. At the end of, it's actually the beginning of chapter 3, that Jesus has healed on the Sabbath. I believe it's possible we may have, covered this before back in Capernaum, but Mark has there was a man with a withered hand, and in the synagogue, Jesus decided to go ahead and heal him on the Sabbath day, and then asked the question, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or evil, to save life or to kill? And they got no answer. Hey, you got no answer? Hey, hold out your hand. Fixed. Again, it's about the Sabbath is supposed to be a day for good and for health and restoration and rest. And Jesus, as the Lord of the Sabbath, because he's the Son of God, says these are the things that make sense to do. Okay. Now we're going to jump over to the book of Matthew, to chapter 12, verse 15. The heading in my Bible is God's chosen servant. The people, the Pharisees are now, according to that last little bit there from Mark, the Pharisees are now looking for an opportunity to have Jesus dealt with. They want him out of the picture. He's dangerous, and he is bucking all kinds of things that he's going against thousands of years of tradition. So verse 15 starts like this. Aware of this, Jesus withdrew from that place. A large crowd followed him, and he healed all who were ill. He warned them not to tell others about him. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. Here's my servant whom I have chosen, the one I love, in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will proclaim justice to the nations. He will not quarrel or cry out. No one will hear his voice on the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out, till he has brought justice through to victory. In his name the nations will put their hope. All right. Jesus is moving because the Pharisees and the Jewish leaders are getting more aggressive. The language indicates that he's trying to stay out of sight. I mean, he is not running from cave to cave or corner to corner, but he is not doing anything to draw attention to himself because he has a lot of ministry and other things to do. There are people who need to hear the truth. There are people whose lives need to be changed. So, as much as he wants to stay out of the limelight, the crowds aren't having it. They're just going to follow him everywhere. They are absolutely relentless. And because he has compassion, what does Jesus do? He heals the sick. He heals the injured. He casts out demons. He ministers. He does the job that he was made for. But he does charge the people, specifically the ones out of whom an evil spirit has come, to not say anything. Don't let anybody know what happened. Just keep it to yourself. The less publicity he receives, the more ministry he can do until his mission is complete.
But even if they did that, people would still know because they would have known him before.
The verb that is used there for warning them strongly, sometimes it's admonish or rebuke or charge directly. It is a very strong direction. Look, do not tell. Seriously, don't tell anybody what happened. We just do not tell anyone. It is a strong direction from him, but even so, it goes along with this description that comes from Isaiah 41 of the gentle servant. I think it was Max Lucado wrote a book a few years back about bruised reeds and smoldering wicks. That's just such a very descriptive passage. So the idea is, if Jesus is coming along someplace and he sees a cattail that is leaning over because it's got a weak spot in it, he's not just going to go and chop it off. He won't do that. If he comes in and he sees that the wick in the oil lamp is kind of still smoldering, he doesn't go. He just lets it because he is gentle. He wants things to work out at their own time. A lot of Isaiah's words have to do with not being loud. You're not going to hear his voice out in the streets. He's not one of those guys driving up and down in the back of a van with a microphone. No, come see, it's the greatest. He's not doing that. He's not abrasive. He is not combative. He's not seeking out challenges, but he is compassionate and gentle and healing and administering. He knows that he has been commissioned by God to bring justice through to victory. And so he's not going to stop doing what he's doing until there's victory, until there is, until things are won. There's the implication in the language of force overcoming opposing force. Jesus is just going to keep on doing his mission because he's got more power. He has more force than those people who are against him. He's gonna win. It's destined. So he's going to bring justice all the way to victory until the foe, whatever that is utterly vanquished and dealt with forever. He is the chosen servant, compassionate and commissioned, and he's not going to stop. Deep thoughts? Can't believe you're just going to let me get away with all this morning. You're not even going to ask a question. Okay. Well, then let's go back to Mark 3. You had your chance.
Somebody was looking for.
No. Mark 3, verse 7. He's doing all this healing, doing all this preaching, all this teaching. And so now, verse 7, Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the lake, and a large crowd from Galilee followed him. When they heard about all he was doing, many people came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, and the regions across the Jordan and around Tyre and Sidon. Because of the crowd, he told his disciples to have a small boat ready for him to keep the people from crowding him, for he had healed many, so that those with diseases were pushing forward to touch him. Whenever the impure spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." But he gave them strict orders not to tell others about him. Okay, Jesus is still drawing great big crowds, and Mark tells us where they have come from. And I'll say it is from a variety of really far apart places. Okay, so we'll go with this map for now. This is better. Well, map is better. Paper's not. Oh my gosh. These things are probably only about 50 years old. Okay, so Idumea is all the way down here, south and west of the Dead Sea. There's not a lot going on here. It's a lot of brown, a lot of dry. Idumea comes from the name for Edom, who was another name for Esau. So the descendants of Esau, Jacob's brother, these are all the people who have settled here. He talks Mark said that they've come from Idumea, from Judea, this section here, specifically from Jerusalem. He says that they've come from Tyre and Sidon. I mean, this is way, way far away from Jerusalem, for sure. And he talks about the region across the Jordan. Sometimes we call that the Transjordan. So all of this over here, the Decapolis, all of this turf over here. So the figuring that I did really quick with, measuring on a pencil and the scale was that from here up to here and from here to here, that easily, without being very specific, Jesus is pulling people from a thick 6,000 square mile area. From Logan to Provo, from the lake across the mountain over to Morgan, and probably then some. And these people are not getting in their car and driving at 75 miles an hour. I mean, these are people who are walking 8 or 10 miles a day to come find Jesus. I think that is just...
What amazes me too is how the word spread out.
Yeah.
Before they started walking.
No social media, no billboards, just only word of mouth.
And this all for people who were told not to say anything.
Please don't talk about this. Please don't talk about this. I really need you to not talk about this. Okay, I'll tell everybody. It's 50 miles from Sidon, which is the farthest north, to Galilee. Jerusalem is 85 miles from Capernaum. So, again, very large territory, without media, without newspapers, without telephones, no billboards, no newspapers, and everybody who comes to him is walking for miles and miles, days and days. In verse 9, the people have come, and they have come in so thick and so close. I would imagine if Jesus had any kind of claustrophobia thing going on, he might have been freaking out. I probably would have been like, "Ooh, get me out of here!" Yeah. So many people. He says, "Grab a boat. I need to be in the boat because if I don't get out into the water, they're going to crush me." So there are just so many people who want to get to him. And he still is full of compassion. He recognizes that he's been given by God. And so he heals people. He casts out demons. He speaks God. The one specific thing here in this passage, that when Jesus encounters people who have been possessed by evil spirits, when he meets them, the unclean spirits make the first move. Jesus doesn't go, "Hey, I see you over there, come out of him." Nope. When the person gets close enough, the evil spirits are the ones who start making racket. They shriek and shout and scream, "Hey, we know who you are, you're the Son of God," and he immediately sends them out and orders them to stay quiet about his identity. It is hard enough to do ministry the way that it is without even further sort of spectacular supernatural advertising as well.
So the spirits, the bad spirits know who he is, but the Pharisees don't.
Absolutely. That is one of the great ironies of the Gospels. The evil spirits see Jesus, they recognize him immediately, they testify that he is the Son of God, but the people who have been studying the law and hoping and praying for hundreds of years, thousands of years for the Messiah to come, cannot figure out who Jesus is.
Well, I'm not sure. Sometimes they knew and they didn't want competition.
Can you hear Cody, ladies? Cody said he believes that the Pharisees knew, but they didn't want the competition. They recognized that Jesus was probably the Messiah, but he wasn't going to turn out to be what they had hoped for. And if they did, then they would lose power, and so they wouldn't acknowledge it. They may be right. With all those thousands of Pharisees, I'm sure there are people kind of, mixed bag of, across the spectrum who believed or didn't believe and why.
Nicodemus.
Well, I'm sure they felt threatened.
Yes, I am absolutely confident they felt threatened. The longer we go, or the closer we get to the end of the Gospels, the more threatened they become. And as such, they get aggressive and start plotting and planning to deal with this troublemaker. Okay. Two passages are right up next to each other. Mark 3:13, which is right here where we are. Oops. And then also the parallel passage in Luke chapter 6, verses 12 through 19. So after all this healing and all this pushing and crowding, when everybody finally went home, Mark says Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. Okay, so there are all of these followers of Jesus that have gone with him from Nazareth to Capernaum to, wherever they go, a big passel of them. I mean, we may have had the idea there was just 12, but I believe that there has been many more than that. And here is where Jesus is going to kind of make a cut. He appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. These are the 12 he appointed: Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter; James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. To them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder, because they were kind of rammy and loud. AJ would be a son of thunder. Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Luke's is almost exactly the same. They went to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. When the morning came, he called the disciples and chose 12 of them, whom he also designated apostles. That's not actually, those words are not actually in the text just like that. But what it says is that he was going to send them, which is what the Greek word for sending is apostello. So if you have been sent apostello, then you are an apostolos. You're a sent one. Simon Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Simon, who was called the Zealot, Judas, son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. Okay, so Jesus goes through all of the disciples. He looks at them. He's been watching them. He has seen them interact, and so he says, "I want you 12 to come closer. I'm going to send you out to preach and to teach, to heal, and to drive out demons." And the list, 11 out of 12 are exactly the same names. Simon and Andrew, the brothers; James and John, the brothers; Philip and Bartholomew, who are best buddies, and then the rest. There's only one difference, which is somebody lists Thaddeus and somebody lists Judas, son of James. Most scholars believe that this is the same guy. He just has more than one name, because you look at that list and he called Simon Peter, and he called James and John the Thunder Boys, and he called Simon the Zealot. So everybody's got kind of a nickname. Probably the most significant thing about the names is that they are no longer just disciples. They're not just students of a teacher now, but now they're apostles. Yes, Robert?
So, did Jesus call all 12 of them to be disciples individually? I know he could, like Matthew, follow me. Was that the case with all 12 of them, or does it say?
I can't answer that because we don't have all the information.
So it doesn't.
We do know that he specifically called Simon Simon Peter and Andrew, and James and John, and Philip and Bartholomew, and we know that he called Levi or Matthew. But those are the ones where there's a specific, hey, you right there, come follow me.
Right.
We don't have that information for the other, whatever that is, 5 or 6 men on the list. But all of those men were followers. They sat at Jesus' feet. They saw him as their master and their teacher, and so they really were in it. And I suppose that probably the crazy thing is Jesus saw something in all of these men that was good, that was important, that was useful, that was beneficial. All of them. Even Judas, who would betray him. Does Jesus pick Judas just because he knew he had to pick him because he would betray him? I don't know. I personally believe, and this is not in a book, chapter, or verse anywhere, and you don't have to pass this test to get into heaven. But I feel like Judas was selected because there were good things about Judas. That there was a reason, a good reason, a positive reason that he was called to be one of the 12, to go out and to teach and to preach and to heal and to cast out evil spirits. What happened to him later on, I do not know. I don't know.
So the ones that got a personal invitation had the nicknames, kinda.
At least most of them.
Okay.
Joanne's got a question. Yes, Joanne. Or she's telling me to stop, one of the two.
Mark and Luke's calling of the 12. Luke has the last two, Judas, son of James, and Judas Iscariot. But when I look at Mark, I can't find 2 Judases.
No, but you do find Thaddeus.
Okay.
The belief is that Thaddeus and Judas, the son of James, are the same person, just a different name. Not everybody believes that. That maybe there was a change made later on, that this is some kind of, what's the word for it? Rewriting history after the fact, that Judas, the son of James, or Thaddeus, the son of James, that something happened with one of them, and so later on there was a substitution made with one of them. I just believe, like everybody else who's got 2 or 3 names, that that's their deal. That Thaddeus and Judas are the same. On that specific question, there are a lot of different opinions from scholars and commentators. This Judas guy, Thaddeus guy, is tricky. There's some people who think that this Judas, that he is the Jude that the letter is written from in the New Testament, that he is connected to Jesus in some special way. But there's really not a lot of detail about that. And what that would indicate to me is that, while it may be interesting, it probably is not essential to the story of the gospel. So I know when I have been a part of Last Supper dramas, that we always called him Thaddeus. So
Could it be that Mark and Luke had a different relationship with the same person?
could it be that Mark and Luke have different relationships with the same person?
I have a brother
Sure.
that some people call Michael. We call him Scott.
Whoa, those are not the same.
It's his middle name.
Michael and Scott are
Yeah. So
I-
some people call him Michael, some call him Scott, depending on how close you are to him.
true. Well, I can tell when you knew me by the name that you call me. If you call me James, I know that we have had most of our relationship in Utah. If you call me Jim, then you either went to high school with me or college, or you were in my first youth group in Francisville. If you call me Jamie, then you are family,
That
or
sounds
you're
like your mom.
or somebody who knew me from grade school. Because in 6th grade, when I moved to junior high, it's like, Jamie is not a good name for me. I don't want to be Jamie, I want to be Jim. So I switched it when I moved to a different building. But yeah, I think it's the same kind of a deal. Depending on when you knew them, how you knew them, maybe something was a little more formal or something.
Just a thought.
Yeah, I believe that's possible. The one thing that I definitely want to draw attention to, and it's good because we're perfect on time. Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted. That's Mark 3:13. Luke 6:12. One of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray, and he spent the night praying to God. You think there's some kind of application there for you and for me?
I would think so, yeah.
So this is the eve of a big decision. Jesus is going to bring these men up to be closer, to be his band of merry men, the closest disciples. And how does he spend the night? All night before?
Talking to his father.
Praying.
He's gonna give him some of
Is
his
this
power
what
too.
I should be doing?
Jesus spends the night in prayer alone as he gets ready to make this big development. How often do we spend even an hour in prayer and meditation before we make a big decision? See, you thought this was all going to be sweet and easy and happy this morning, and here I come right at the end. Stab you right in your heart. Jesus spends all night praying about these men. Who are the ones that I should choose? What are things going to be like for them? Talking to his Father for hours to get just the right men in just the right positions. But we might go buy a car or buy a house or make a decision to move or quit our job without so much as God is great, God is good, let us thank him for our food kind of prayer. I believe that Jesus gives us a really great example that when we're about to undertake something significant, for certainly something significant, that we need to spend a lot of time in prayer with God. Okay. That's all the notes that I have. Anybody have any questions or comments about anything this morning? No. Why can I not figure that out? Okay. Well, I'm going to turn off the recorder. Thanks so much for being here. You can always go back and watch whatever.